So let's talk a little bit about some of the other trends that we're going to be seeing. And as I said, many of these have been developing over a longer period of time. And these are 5 that I'm going to highlight. One is gardens for good. That is gardens that have something else that they offer to the homeowner. Gardens that are adaptable, and that has to do mostly with the changing weather patterns. Age-appropriate gardens, which are those for different people at different points of their life. I think we are going to be seeing more colorful gardens and also more soulful gardens. So let's sort of check out each of these trends. First one is gardens for good. And these are gardens that are pretty and they do something else. They provide food for the family or the community. They're pretty and they help pollinators. They're pretty and they clean water. They're pretty and they save energy by providing shade. More people are wanting gardens that are useful as well as beautiful, and a lot of that is due to the work of one man. His name is Douglas Ptolemy. I'm sure many of you have read his first book. I think it was called Bringing Nature Home. And his second book came out in 2019. It was called Nature's Best Hope. And in this book, Ptolemy argues that in terms of conserving plant species and insects and other aspects of nature, we really cannot rely on conservation parks. We aren't going to have enough area set aside for nature to live in the wild, if you will. So instead, we're really going to have to rely on home gardens and home landscapes to support the wildlife, the insects, the pollinators, the birds, the plants that we all love. And it's really a rallying cry to individuals because, as he says here, effective conservation is not beyond the reach of the individual. Indeed, it's your efforts as an individual that will determine whether we succeed or fail. And I will tell you, as someone who has converted a very small area in my own yard into what's called an insectary garden, the amazing quantity of insect life and birds that I'm seeing in that garden, it's stunning. And so just a little bit of space really can make a lot of difference for nature. One of the aspects that, of course, Ptolemy suggests is planting more native plants. And I think we will see a greater emphasis on native plants over the next several years. We already have, and it's going to continue. So if you want to know which native plants help the most insects in your specific area, and this is really part of Ptolemy's point, which is not only do we grow natives that are North American natives, we want to grow natives to our specific area. So there's a website out there called, it's the National Wildlife Foundation, so it's nwf.org/native plant finder. And I think if you just Google native plant finder, you'll find it. And you can put in your zip code and it will tell you which plants are most useful to insects, pollinators, and others in your area. And most likely, these are 2 of the plants that are going to come up. The first is the willow, the one on the right. And willows assist 355 species of insects and birds in your area, in your zip code. I looked it up. And most of the time, most of the insects are assisted. I mean, the larger number of insects assisted by a particular plant tend to be plants that are trees and shrubs. So willows are by far number 1, but very close behind them are the prunus species, so cherry trees, choke cherries. Then birches and oaks are other very significant trees and shrubs in terms of native insects and birds. Now, among perennials, goldenrod is almost always number 1 in Minnesota, but their native strawberry is a very nice plant for insects, or you can do something like a sunflower, helianthus. Now, the thing with many native plants, and I say this as someone who has a small garden and a lot of native plants, is that they are big, and some of them are kind of scruffy. And so plant companies have responded to this by creating what are called native vars or cultivars of native plants. And this is a trend I see continuing for many years to come as we figure out more and more how much you can modify a native plant and still have it do the extra work it's supposed to do. And the truth is, there isn't much research that has been done on this, but the research that has been done suggests that the closer they are to the native plant in appearance, the better they will work. It also suggests that you can change flower color and form a little bit, but changing leaf color is less likely to attract the pollinators that you want to attract. So here are 3 examples of nativars, and I think you're just going to be seeing tons and tons of these in the garden centers over the years, and many of them are lovely plants. The first is called the one on the right. Or excuse me, the one on the left is Cinderella milkweed. The middle one is another milkweed. It's a different species of Asclepias. It's called Hello Yellow milkweed. And the last one is lemon meringue baptisia. And there are tons and tons of baptisia that have been hybridized and are released into the market. They are a beautiful plant. I happen to grow lemon meringue, and it does attract pollinators, but I will tell you that the purple ones, which are of course closer to the native Baptisia australis, which is a purple bloom, the purple ones like Twilight Prairie Blues, etc., do a better job of attracting pollinators. Now that's just an observation of mine. You do see pollinators on the lemon meringue, and I love the color of it, but you'd see more on a purple one. So I may add a purple one to my yard. Here's a kind of just a side-by-side comparison between a native and a cultivar of a native. This is on the right is the Monarda didyma, the red sort of standard milk bee balm that we're all familiar with. And then on the left is one called Pardon My Lavender. So quite a bit of difference in how the flower looks and of course in the color. I'm betting you would see pollinators on Pardon My Lavender, but maybe not quite as many as you would see on the native. Now, interestingly, sometimes the cultivar actually does a little better at attracting pollinators than the native. So on the left, you have the native winterberry, Ilex verticulata, and then on the right is berry-heavy winterberry. And research that was done by Douglas Ptolemy, and his center is doing some of this research in natives, found that for insects, they actually preferred the nativar plants or the cultivar plants that had bigger berries. They preferred that plant over the regular genus and species plant. Now, birds thought the berries were a little too big, but it's very interesting how hybridizing efforts can have different results. And I'm just going to throw out one last nativar that I kind of think is an interesting plant, and it's this low-growing chokeberry called low-scape mound Aronia melancarpa. It's a new plant, very tough plant. It has a lot of benefits of the native, and it makes a wonderful, useful ground cover for perhaps a shady area. So that's one of the trends we're seeing is this trend toward native plants and nativars. Another one is sort of the limitation of grass, of what I call turf wars. One interesting thing about the 16 million new gardeners is that many of them are opposed to grass. They don't like lawn as much for environmental reasons, because the traditional Kentucky bluegrass type lawn that we might have here does require a bit of fertilizer, not a ton, but a little bit. It might require a herbicide. It certainly requires quite a bit of water in our climate. unless we're having a really wet season. So there is a little bit of opposition to lawn. Now that said, lawn has a lot of good purposes. I live next door to a family that has 6 children, and they play on their lawn and they play on my lawn. And lawns are great for kids to play on, for, resting the eye between garden beds. I mean, some people say think of your lawn as like a lake or a river through your garden plantings. So, lawn's not all bad. But I think we will see a trend towards some lawn alternatives. And I'm going to just show you a picture of one of them. This is at a Japanese garden that I visited. It's a private home garden in St. Paul. And the homeowner in that section of the garden, right just beyond the rocks in the front of the picture, that is not a regular kind of turf grass. It's a new kind of buffalo grass. It's called Legacy Buffalo Grass. I believe it is Zone 3 hardy, and it is not kind of a no-mow alternative. It's a very soft, so if you're not using your lawn for, putting practice or kids playing or something like that, it's just mostly a visual thing. Something like this might be a real good alternative. You could certainly walk on it, no problem with that. The interesting thing about Legacy Bluegrass is it comes up later in the season than the weeds do. So you can easily go through and weed it early in the season, and then it greens up and it's this lovely kind of longer grass that you don't really have to mow, doesn't really need much rain. It's an excellent alternative if you don't want sort of a traditional landscape. Okay, I'm going to stop here and we'll go on to the next video in just a few minutes.